Effect.
¿Cómo estás? Another episode of Ripple Effect Podcast. I'm your host, Ricardo Vance, also known as Ricky France, and a great episode for you today. Returning guest, podcaster, comedian, TV host, been in movies, has done a bunch of stuff, including this podcast on episode 169 in November of 2018. Jim Florentine. He did The Metal Show. He did Crank Yankers. He's been in movies like Trainwreck with Amy Schumer. He does a podcast called Everyone is Awful Except You. And just an awesome guy. We have so much in common in regards to our perspectives, and we're both East Coast guys with that are in the metal and sports and music and art and comedy and wrestling and all those things. So we talk about all that and more. First time he was on, I believe the title of the show was called Metal Comedy Conspiracies, and that's a lot of what we talk about today too. We talk about comedy, we talk about conspiracies, we talk about wrestling, sports, COVID-19, protests, so many different topics, and it was a really fun, casual conversation, just two dudes bullshitting. On this show, I try to recreate a conversation that you might overhear or be a part of at a pub, two guys just hanging out and having a drink, and sometimes it's successful, sometimes it's not. And today it's definitely one of those shows. At some point I almost forgot I was doing a podcast. I was kind of hanging out and bullshitting with Jim. So really fun conversation. Hopefully you guys enjoy it. They say if the podcaster is enjoying it, then usually the listeners are. So hopefully that is true. And also remember to support both of us. Support Jim Florentine. Go on his website, jimflorentine.com. I'll put that in the show description, the links to his social media websites, accounts, and also his website where you can get his DVD, his merchandise, shirts, all that stuff. Remember to subscribe to his podcast, which I believe I said already. Everybody is Awful Except You. It's also a book. Support him. If you want to support my show, I have a Patreon page. Every penny, every dollar, everything counts. So definitely that's all. Speaking of music, that's actually an old song by Depeche Mode. Everything counts. And the reason why Depeche Mode is on my mind is because I was just thinking about their other song called People Are People not too long ago, and it seems like a very relevant song. If you read those lyrics, it seems like a song that people need to listen to right now. But enough of that. Enjoy the show, guys. This is a video episode. Anybody who calls in using video, you can go on our YouTube channel, RV Theory 6, and find the video version of all our episodes. You can see Jim and I actually have the conversation. So if you want to do that, please do. Subscribe, review, like, share, all that. If you can financially support the show, go on our Patreon page, support the show. The links, like I said, will be in the show description. But if you can't, no big deal. Like I always tell you, sharing it, putting it on your social media accounts, telling a friend about it, word of mouth, whatever, all that stuff helps. Review it, thumbs up, all that stuff, and it goes a long way. So hopefully everybody's safe, sane, and doing well. Before I forget, also the music you hear in this podcast and all my podcasts is Theory 6. It's my solo music project. You can get that anywhere. You can get digital downloads. If you want to support the show that way, please do. Also, if you want to follow me on Instagram, Twitter, RV Theory 6, it's same thing as our YouTube channel, RV Theory 6. You can find my personal page on Facebook. If you want to connect with me, please do. Just let me know that you're not spam or some robot or whatever, and just send me a little message. Tell me you're a listener of the show, and I have no problem connecting on Facebook. My music project, Theory 6, and the Ripple Effect Podcast both have their own Facebook pages, so you can also connect with me there. And like I said before, all that stuff's going to be in the show notes. So take care, guys, and see you on the next one. Peace.
What's going on?
Hey, thanks, Jim. Thanks for being with me. Last time we talked, holy shit, has the world changed.
When was the last? Was it like 6 months ago? I'm trying to remember what it was.
It might. That's a good question. I might actually just look it up because I'm curious.
Yeah.
But I know last time, I remember I saw you live with Rich Voss locally too, sometime around that time.
Oh, just me and him?
No, there was so I'm trying to think who else was with you. You were in because I'm from Massachusetts. You were at that I think it's like a gambling place near the Bradley Airport in Connecticut.
Oh, that place. Yeah. That was with Ron Bennington too.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, that's what it was. Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, you were on. Holy crap! November 29th, 2018.
Yeah.
Holy shit!
I remember. I don't know what show you came to. We did two that night. One was great, and the other one sucked.
Yeah, I'm trying to think which one. Well, I know there was definitely some shithead hecklers. It's funny, as many shows as you do, you would think that comedians don't remember that stuff, but you guys have a pretty good memory in regards to like which show sucked, and even though it was quite a bit ago.
Yeah, because it was in a sports bar, Bobby Valentine's sports bar, whatever the hell it was. So.
That's what it is. Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, and they just, there's a lot of distractions and TVs and all that stuff. Yeah, and the first show was great, but the second show, you do a 10:30 show on a Saturday night, and they've been drinking since 4 or 5 in the afternoon, and they're just yelling shit out from a radio show or whatever they know you for during the show. So I remember that, though.
Yeah, I remember that, too, and that's probably, and I was wondering, too, I'm like, I wonder why, because, I mean, I go to a lot of shows, not as much as I used to with kids, but the wife and I used to go to shows all the time, and that show, it seemed like they were like hectic right off the start, and I'm just like, now that you put that in perspective, the fact that they've probably been hanging out gambling all day, whatever they're doing there, betting on horses or dogs or whatever, whatever weird sport you can bet on there, and then next thing the show comes on and they're already half in the bag. Yeah, so I can see where when you go to a comedy show, a lot of times maybe you have time to have a drink or two before the show, but you're not hammered by the time the show starts. So I can see how it's a different feel for the crowd.
And it's also not a comedy room. Like, it's not known for comedy. So, if it's in an improv or a Funny Bone or some established room, it's going to be a little different. You're not going to get half the crowd drunk yelling shit. They know how to behave. Like when you do it in a sports bar and set up tables and seats, it's a recipe for disaster.
Yeah, because I've been there before with my father-in-law, and he's actually a huge fan of yours. And I think you're probably the only guest he's ever given a shit that's been on my show. But
oh, really?
Yeah. But he's I went there with him once, and he told me about it. We went there and stuff, and I remember I can't remember if you were on the show right before or right after you were. I saw that you were booked there. But either way, I remember it was around that time, and I didn't even know there was a comedy club there. It's that they did comedy there, so I can see how like that can be an issue too, because like you said, if you go to a Funny Bone, like we have the Manchester Funny Bone in Connecticut, where they actually get quite a lot of good guests, comedians. I've seen you there quite a few times. I've seen Rich Voss there. I remember seeing Bert Kreischer there. Who else? Tommy Segura, Amy Schumer was there. I remember before she got fat. I mean big. And I'm kidding. And yeah, and it's a great little club, and I was always amazed by the amount of awesome comedians. I remember seeing who else was there?
I know Jim Norton's done it before.
Yeah, Jim Norton,
Nick DiPaolo,
Bobby Lee, Greg Giraldo before he passed away. I remember seeing him twice there before he passed away. So it was funny. I remember telling people too about the Manchester Funny Bone, that it's in the mall, and then I'm telling them the people I've seen there, including yourself, and people are like, "Really? At a club in the mall?" I'm like, "Yeah." I'm like, "They book. Well, how do they do that? Why do they just have a great relationship with the comedians? Is it because you can do multiple shows 4 days in a row? How does like a place that it's in the mall, it doesn't, you wouldn't take it as seriously, but then you see the lineup and you're like, holy shit, like they have a great comedians there all the time."
Yeah, well, the Improvs and Funny Bones came up with this formula that if they're in a mall, there's more foot traffic going by, going by the store, so they're going to sell more tickets. So I think that was the thing. So they always tried to find, whether it be in a strip mall or a regular mall, they would put those comedy clubs in. So, and that room used to be like the best room in the country. And I remember the last time I was there, probably about a year and a half ago, when I walked in there, and, the mall traffic is way down to begin with everybody just buying shit online. The Panera Bread right next door to the Funny Bone was closed. And I've never seen a Panera Bread like out of business. And I'm like, that's not a good sign. And the crowds were like half of what they used to be. And it just wasn't the same.
Yeah, malls have to change their formula, because before people used to go there to shop and whatnot, but now, like you said, everybody buys things online. So you can see malls like locally. I'm in Ludlow, Massachusetts, a little like a Portuguese community, and right outside of Springfield, Massachusetts. And the biggest mall is the Holyoke Mall, and they've completely changed how to get people to come to the mall. They have arcades now. They have mazes and all this stuff, and it's become like a social event, somewhere to go to, get together with friends. I know malls now even have gyms. I've seen a lot of malls with gyms, which is a little weird, just kind of sweating your ass off and then just somebody just casually walking by seeing you.
Yeah.
But I think that's kind of been, so maybe there'll be this, resurgent of comedy clubs, because people are going to start looking at malls not a place to buy things, but a place to go see entertainment, or a place to go be entertained and do stuff with your friends. So maybe that will change in time. But yeah, I mean, I think it's a great idea to kind of malls to change their kind of their business approach.
Yeah, and as far as a comic, like, as long as, the other comics will talk. Like if Greg Giraldo went in that Funny Bone and, Manchester, years ago, and came back to New York City, goes, man, it's a great room. Then every other comedian go, okay, I want to play there. And we don't care if it's in a mall or wherever, as long as the crowds are good and, it's set up well. And, so that's all we care about. We're like, all right, if it's in a mall, it's in a mall. What are we going to do?
Yeah, yeah. And I mean, it gave you a little bit of material too, because just about every comedian kind of made fun of it because it was in a mall. But yeah, and again, like once, and I don't know how it's like for the comedian, but as the person going there, once I'm caught up in your material and I'm caught up in the story or the joke, I don't give a fuck where I'm sitting. I could be sitting in a huge auditorium, or I could be sitting in a small little club. To me, it's almost like you're seeing a lot of sports without the fans, and talking to athletes and stuff like that. They kind of talk about how, yeah, some athletes not having the fans there it's going to be a huge a change. But a lot of times when you're in the zone and you're focused on doing your craft, a lot of times everything else kind of disappears a little bit. Is it the same with comedy?
Yeah, it doesn't. I mean, I always said that about like going away on vacation. Like, why do you have to go, take 7 planes somewhere to go, to a beach, when you could be on a beach in, I don't know, New Jersey. And if you're on the beach, you're on the beach. It's the same thing.
That's a
like
really
you
good
could
point.
suspend disbelief. It's still the water. It's still the beach. And, whatever, you bring whatever you do at the beach. So I always like, why do we have to go that far? We're going to sit on the same sand that we could sit on at home. And I watch, my kid watches pro wrestling, so we've been watching again, the WWE, and they got no audience. And at first it was weird. I'm like, but it works, because when you're at home, it's like I don't really care what the crowd is doing. I'm just watching the event.
It's funny because my kids, they weren't really big into WWE. I watched it growing up as a kid because my parents and I came from Portugal, and it was like that and like the Three Stooges, anything where they could follow along even if they didn't understand the language. So a lot of the weird things, like our family would get together, watch WWE, would get together, watch the Three Stooges, stuff like that, just silly stuff. And I got out of it as a adult. And I remember making fun of like some of my friends who like still had WrestleMania parties. And I'm like, dude, come on, you're not over that shit, And then making fun of them. And then since all this shit happened and we got to WWE Network to give them something to watch, and then we all got into it. And now we're all like attached to it. We're going back watching I mean, the crazy thing is that app has everything you can think of, every single pay-per-view ever, every ECW. I was a big ECW guy back in the day. They had every ECW, every documentary, every SmackDown, Raw, everything you can think of. Like I couldn't believe the archives, and going back and watching is actually brings back memories.
Yeah, I mean, that app is unbelievable. Like, there's matches on there from the '80s in Madison Square Garden that my dad took me to. That I was at those matches.
That's wild.
Yeah, and I'm watching my kid. I'm like, I'm in that audience somewhere. But like getting back to the audience, the live audience, I always hated that. Like in a baseball game, it's the 8th or 9th inning and it's a close game and they got to keep cutting to the people in the crowd praying. You know what I mean? I go, I don't care. I know they're watching the game. Why do I need to watch people watching the game? Like I want it on the field. I don't need to see a guy in the stands, with his hands folded. He's got his stupid rally cap on. But, like, that doesn't do anything for me in my living room. I just want to see the field.
Well, the funny thing about that type of stuff is you always know, like, the pervert camera guy, because if you're watching sports, all of a sudden they go to, like, the next camera, and it's, like, a close-up to some hot chick in the crowd, and you're like, why are they so close to this chick? And it was some bored camera guy who was like, hey, let me zoom into this blonde, and you'd see that all the time. But WWE, I give Vince McMahon and Dana White a lot of credit, because when everybody else is freaking out about this shit, they're one of the few ones that are like, forget the public backlash, the public shaming. We're going to, Americans, people need something, and they continue doing it. And it's funny because I made fun of Florida, I mean, like a lot of people did for a long time. And now I'm like, you know what? Like, they're the only ones who are ballsy enough to fucking say, hey, professional sports, come to us. And we have a bunch of retired people here. And guess what? Our numbers are down, and people are going to the beach and living normal. So, I mean, thank God for Florida to give these organizations a place to actually put a show together and give us a little getaway from the crazy news from time to time.
Yeah, I mean, the comedy clubs are all opening down there. They've been open for a few weeks now. Every comedian is calling Florida clubs, their agents. We all want to be down there. They're going to 50% capacity starting tomorrow. All the bars and the comedy clubs and everything like that. They were at 25. Now they're going to 50.
That's awesome. Yeah, I heard Brian Callen and Brennan Schaub, they did a show somewhere recently, too, like a week ago.
In Texas. They went to Houston.
Okay, that's what it is. Yeah. Well, Texas is the other place, right? I mean,
it's like, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, they were ballsy enough to kind of just open things up. And now, I mean, just today, Neil Ferguson, the scientist who his crazy predicted numbers are the ones that created and provoked the UK lockdown. Now, and I mean, never mind, this is the same guy who got arrested not too long ago for breaking the rules of the lockdown to go see his mistress. So this is a guy we should really respect. But just I saw an article today, I shared it in regards to him saying that we should praise Sweden for the way they handled it. And yet this is the same guy that his millions and millions of deaths prediction is the reason why the UK overreacted and shut down the way they did. And now he's saying, well, I think Sweden got it right. And, last time we were on, we didn't get too far into conspiracies. But, we're literally living through some of the most obvious conspiracies, some of the most obvious hoaxes, some of the most obvious chess match, in regards to like how politics are just using people to turn people on one another. I mean, everything has become so political where it's like, if I said anything that was anti the lockdown, everybody assumed I was a Trump supporter. If I said anything that is, pro the protests right now, people think that I'm an anti-Trump supporter. And I'm like, can we just look at ideas and just look at each issue as its own? Like, not every cop is a bad person. Not every black person is a bad person. Protesting's good. Not one person is saying that protesting is bad. I mean, but I think and the crazy thing is, like, media does a great job of separating us. But if you have a discussion with most people, like, we probably, just about everybody agrees. Like, yeah, the vandalizing, all that crazy stuff, that's bad. But the protesting, yeah, that's your constitutional right. I was for the protests when they're protesting the lockdowns all over the country. I was like, yeah, absolutely. Protest. This is bullshit. People, the people who are the least in danger, which is like not old people, everybody but old people, are the ones that our lives are being affected the most. The people who are working, the people who are going out to games and doing social things and hanging out with friends. And so, I mean, in prison, they punish you by putting you by yourself, and that's kind of what they did, and a lot of people did it willingly. They just went into isolation and said, I must protect everybody. But I guess before I go too far on our rant and I get all worked up, what has been your take, and I know you've been in New Jersey. What has it been like in New Jersey with the COVID thing, and then what is it like now with all the protests? Has any of this stuff affected your local neighborhood?
No, not so much with the protesting, but it's funny how the media is not saying anything about all the protesters being right next to each other and getting coronavirus. New York's still closed. They're going to open a little, maybe in 2 weeks, like to phase one. So Minnesota, another place, all these states, New Jersey, where the protest, we're still closed till June 15th too, pretty much. So now they got no problem with everyone right next to each other protesting. Like, no, they're not saying these people are going to have coronavirus in 2 weeks because they're out too soon, which they would do when, those kids will party in the Ozark and one of them tested positive and the media went crazy. Those young 20-year-olds in a lake, one of them tested positive for coronavirus. They just try to steer it that way. But look, if there's not a big outbreak of this coronavirus and within 2 weeks, because it takes, up to 14 days, then just open up everything. Go right to stage 3 in every state.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I mean, it's every prediction has been more wrong than right, and just about everything they said that was going to happen didn't happen. I mean, New York fucked up big time. I mean, they asked for a bunch of respirators that now, they're saying that probably killed a lot of people because they're overusing them. And Cuomo, I mean, let's be honest, a lot of these guys are just doing this for political reasons. I mean, Charlie Baker, same thing, Massachusetts. It's the wife and I went out to eat with the kids last week. We had to go to Connecticut. They're finally opening outside seating. But in Massachusetts, like, no restaurants besides takeouts still and all this stuff. And I mean, I just saw numbers yesterday, and they're like, these are the cases. These are the confirmed and probable cases. And I told my wife, I'm like, doesn't that headline look kind of, shouldn't we be a little skeptical when they say this is the total of confirmed and probable cases? I mean, the thing is, a lot of this stuff was right out in the open. I mean, Dr. Birx said we're being very liberal with our counting of COVID deaths. People who had it were considered deaths by it, which is a huge difference. And and that was happening all over, and all this stuff, and then obviously all the Fauci, the hydroxychloroquine, how that was a essential drug, and of course has some side effects like all things do, all medication does. But people were like, everything was political. Even if you were one of those people that were like, hey, hydroxychloroquine is one of those things that's been around for a long time. They've been giving it out for a long time. Like, hey, if we see some successful benefits from it, why not? But it's like, oh, you're saying that, you must be a Trump supporter. And then if you're against it, and it's like, no, this is a big pharma thing. I mean, they were trying to push. I mean, first of all, CDC, all these organizations got tons of money must find a treatment, must find a vaccine, whatever. And what they didn't want to do is promote a drug that was a generic drug that was pennies on the dollar. They wanted to get something that was patent, where they could push a expensive vaccine but the vaccine debate has changed a little bit, because a lot of people who weren't skeptical about it, maybe a year ago, now are like, and it was funny, I just said this in my last guest, I'm like, isn't it funny how so many people were like, yeah, vaccines are you need vaccines and they're essential and they help people, all this stuff, when they're poking their kids. But now when we're talking about a vaccine for adults, people are like, hey, I don't want to get any new vaccine, but yeah, you'll go to a pediatrician and you'll just let them poke your kid with whatever, thimerosal, mercury preservative, or whatever other bullshit they put in it. You don't even look at the insert. You don't ask if there's any danger, or if there's been any side effects or whatnot. And yet when it's your turn, you're like, no, let's pump the brakes.
My kid, he was like 10 weeks old, got the rotavirus vaccine, his first one, and was in the hospital for 5 days from it.
Wow.
From a reaction to it. Yeah, they were almost going to, there's this thing called intussusception or something, where your intestines twist, and that's the side effect to that rotavirus. And I didn't read it. I'm just like, okay, I'm a new parent. All right, he's got to get it. It was in there in pain 5 days.
And nothing
and they
is
find,
worse.
I'm like, I'm telling the doctors, I go, listen, it's because of this. He was fine before he got this. And they just, I don't know, I can't answer that. I'm like, what do you mean you can't answer that? And they finally, ruled that it was definitely a side effect from the vaccine. But that, they were going to operate on. They were going to take apart his intestine and cut his intestine because it twists. Like they thought that he was going to get that. That's a side effect to it. He didn't have it, but he got really, he was there for 5 days. He's 10 weeks old, all hooked up and stuff like that. So it's crazy with that.
And that's the thing. As a parent, nothing is worse than feeling helpless, right? I mean, just like being there, knowing you can't do anything. It's I mean, any parent. I had I've had Del Bigtree on the show, but I also had they're two people founders of the CT Freedom Alliance, which is a nonprofit organization from Connecticut, and they're pushing for. They're not an anti-vaccine organization. They're basically people having the right to. They push for people having the right to either get them or not get them. But, you know, in Connecticut, they're trying to get rid of religious exemptions, so they're fighting back against that. And both founders had vaccine-injured kids, you know, and that's how they got involved in this. One was an attorney, another one was, I believe she was in the military, and both have. And what people don't know is there's a vaccine court that gives out millions of dollars to families who are injured. I mean, on the CDC website, you can find where they say, and I've shared it before online, you know, the possible side effects of vaccines and the neurological issues. I mean, all types of things. Like, and the thing is, like, it's just logic. If I give every kid in the world peanut butter, some kids are going to have allergic reaction to it and probably die. Like, so if I give the same cocktail to every single kid everywhere, but yet we understand that every human body is slightly different. One diet might work good for you, and I might have to modify for myself to get the same benefits. Like, we understand there's variations in people and the way we handle things, but yet we think that we can give every single kid the exact same vaccine and nobody has side effects to it. Like, yeah, there's risks to vaccines. There's also risks to not getting them. But the problem is that we don't get that side of the story. If you say anything about the risks with getting vaccines, it's like you're a conspiracy theorist, you're a lunatic, you're this and you're that. You know, the science is settled, all this stuff. I mean, Del Bigtree, he on every show he's been on, including mine, we've had issues with downloads. Like I'll get listeners saying, "Hey, this show won't play." This show, I had to contact iTunes, whatever, try to get it, and it wasn't a coincidence because every show he's done prior to that, same thing. Like all of a sudden, and it's like, to me, the most important thing is getting both sides of the argument. Like, let people decide, what information makes the most sense to them. Don't just say that, "Hey, we know what the truth is, and our interpretation or our opinions are the only ones that you should be able to see and are suitable for the public, and we're going to just, filter out everything else." That's bullshit.
The vaccine court, first of all, every pediatrician gets a rebate every vaccine they give out. And also some of that vaccine, that whatever the insurance company charges, the pediatrician charges the health insurance company, goes to the vaccine court. A piece of that to build up that money. So if some kid gets injured, and also you are not allowed to talk about what vaccine injured your kid. Like if you have paid $6 million because your kid, was paralyzed the rest of his life from a shot, you're not allowed to talk about that in public, about what vaccine it was. You have to keep your mouth shut.
Yeah, I mean, Robert Kennedy, it's funny because people say it's like this conspiracy theorist, thing. I mean, when that documentary Plandemic came out, they're like, oh, it's a right-wing conspiracy theory documentary. I'm like, Robert Kennedy Jr. is one of the most outspoken people in regards to vaccines. Is he a right-wing conspiracy theorist? Because, he was a respectful environmental attorney who did a lot of great things, and then all of a sudden he gets involved with this vaccine conversation, and all of a sudden he's a conspiracy theorist, a crazy person. And my biggest problem is, like, okay, have any opinion you want, but most people's opinions are based on what people are saying about it. Like I said on my last show, how it was super interesting how all the social media websites, YouTube, everything, Twitter, everybody got on board and they were yanking that Plandemic documentary as fast as you could upload it. They were yanking it, right? So they're saying this is dangerous information, this is disinformation, you can't watch this. But all the people who were showing clips of it, debunking it, and saying it was a hoax, you could watch the whole movie just based on if somebody's debunking it, but yet you can't. So, like, how bullshit is that? Like, so you can get somebody's narrative on it, somebody's opinion on it, as long as they're saying something negative towards it, but you can't watch it. Like, we're human fucking beings. We should have the right to look at all the information and decide for ourselves.
Remember that movie Vax that came out a couple of years ago? It was in New York Film Festival. And it got submitted, and it was going to play, and like they went crazy like 4 days before, and they had to pull the film because they said you can't put that out there, and people can't see this. And De Niro's got an autistic kid, and De Niro wanted in there, and then he realized his partner's like, "Listen, it's too much controversy. Let's just pull it." And I remember De Niro's on the Good Morning America saying, "Look, there's something out there with these vaccines. That's all I'm going to say." Like he couldn't really speak his mind. And they pulled that movie from a film festival.
Well, that De Niro thing's interesting because initially he didn't know too much about it, and then he eventually ended up watching it. And when he was on, I think it was Today's Show. I saw him on Today's Show, and my wife's like, hey, you know, because obviously I don't watch the Today Show, but she does, and she's like, hey, De Niro's on talking about the Vaxxed documentary. So I watched it, and they're like grilling him. It's funny because his previous appearance on the show, super friendly to him. Now he's on, and like you said, he was kind of painting the picture of like, hey, you guys, he's like, you know, I don't know, but I think people should watch this documentary. Something could be there, you know, he didn't want to, I guess, maybe he didn't want to be called a conspiracy theorist or whatever, but he's just saying, hey, you know, people should watch this. Because what people don't know, most people who haven't watched the documentary don't know, it's not an anti-vax documentary. It's about one specific CDC whistleblower story. And it's about this one study. And you know, Dr. William Thompson. That's what it's about. It's not a completely anti-vax documentary, but it's just letting people know that, like, hey, there is information that's being suppressed, and you know, you should know this. You should see both sides of the story. And then the way they were grilling De Niro, and then like, asking him, like, I forget who was questioning him, but whoever the host was, she was like just grilling him and kind of just trying to get him to look bad. And I'm just like, this is such bullshit. I'm like, they obviously have a narrative that they're pushing, and like, that's all I ask people is like, hey, look at all information, because too often I talk to somebody and they're like, oh, they're anti-vaxxer or whatever. I tell people, I'm like, dude, my kid's 5, my son's 5, my daughter's 3. Neither of them have ever got a vaccine ever. And I had you know, Del Bigtree and Polly from the Vax documentary right after the movie came out. I had them on, and same thing. You're getting people tweeting you stuff, and you're getting a lot by bots saying it's pseudoscience and it's this and it's that, and even the people who are real, who are against it. 5 seconds in talking to them, they don't know what you just stated about the vaccine court. They don't know the fact that they make money off it. They don't realize how much money there is in vaccines. They also don't realize that, like, when we were growing up, the scariest thing was the military-industrial complex. It was like, holy shit, they're so powerful. They can get us into a war. You know, I mean, look at Vietnam. The giant fuck up that was. That's how much power the military-industrial complex had. That we could go into a country, kill millions of people, you know, hurt people, spend millions and millions of dollars, and then just go, oops, yeah, we fucked up. Yeah, you know, maybe it was a bad decision. And I'm like, so now think about the pull that the military-industrial complex has, and now think about the fact that Big Pharma actually has more pull now. They spend more in lobbying. They spend more in marketing. They spend, you know, we're one of 2 countries in the world where they can, you know, advertise, you know, on TV and stuff like that. Us and New Zealand. So it's like, think about you know, when the pill epidemic was happening, and you're an East Coast guy. I was born in Portugal, but I grew up in Massachusetts. You know, we're at the heart of the pill epidemic. And when the election year was going on, and all these politicians are talking about the America's issues, not one brought up pills. Not one brought that up, even though, like, that was killing young people. It's not like this coronavirus, which is killing old people, if you even believe the numbers or believe the tests are accurate, because they're giving out false positives. But even if you believe that, the nursing homes are where the majority of deaths happen. It's killing old people who are already sick, people with a compromised immune systems. The pill epidemic was killing young people who had their whole lives ahead of them, and yet nobody talked about it. And you think that, like, people think that's a coincidence? That's not a fucking coincidence. That's a conspiracy.
Well, yeah, I mean, you know, they give donations to these politicians that are going to keep their mouth shut. You know, also getting back to that real quick, you know, a doctor is not allowed to speak out. Like, if he doesn't think vaccines are safe, say there's one guy out there, he's not allowed to go out there and broadcast that, because then he loses his medical license. So a guy that's married with 2 kids, lives in the suburbs with his wife, he's got a big house, he can't speak out. If he knows there's something in those vaccines that's going to hurt kids, some kids or whatever it is, he's not allowed. If he speaks out, he loses his medical license. So the guy's got a $500,000 house in the suburbs. What is he going to do the rest of his life? So he's got to keep his mouth shut.
Yeah, and the thing is, too, a lot of these doctors that were being... And it's funny how, like, all the protest videos... And I'm all for the protest videos. I think there's a huge issue with racism and that, you know... But I think a lot of it's actually more... We should be more concerned about classism, because I think it's more about the elite against everybody else. And they do a great job of dividing and conquer. You know, they divide us by getting us to fight with one another. We think, you know... some black people think that white people are the problem. Some white people think that black people are the problem, or Americans think the Mexicans are the problem, or whatever it is. We create this boogeyman, and at the end of the day, the policies and those in power, they're just helping each other. They're not. We're all getting fucked. Everybody who's in the middle class and below is all getting fucked. So it's like we should all be on the same team, and we are all on the same team. And it's like when we spend so much energy fighting amongst each other, I think it can be counterproductive.
When you got a politician that could, it might affect them getting reelected again if they're blamed for one death. That's why they're keeping people in. They'd rather be more cautious because they don't want to get blamed. Like, I let people out too early. And, you killed my grandmother. They don't want that. They don't want that narrative out there. So you leave it up to people that are just looking for votes. They're going to play on the safe side. They're going to just go, no, it's better to, maybe they'll be mad, but at least I'm not going to get blamed for anyone dying. So that's where you get, your politicians in this. Is just a mess. Getting back to the CDC real quick. Just remember, the CDC is the same people that said when AIDS came out in the late 80s and 90s that, 50% of heterosexual males will have this. So how did that work out?
And
I knew it was bullshit. I knew it was bullshit when they were saying that at the begin with. When Magic Johnson came out and said he had AIDS and he was heterosexual, and now 50% are HIV positive right now. They knew it was all a lie. Yeah. So they fudged numbers to scare the shit out of you. So I've been on them for years. I don't buy any of that shit. 20 million people in Africa died of AIDS, but only 10,000 here. Why over there but not here? And they say heterosexual males get it in Africa, but they don't get it here. No one brought it here. No heterosexual male brought it here and was getting it. So look, Fauci, in January said there's no human transmission. February 28th says go out there, it's fine. You're not going to get sick. This is the guy we're listening to. Like, how did he not know?
Well, and he was a part of the task force too for AIDS. He was a part of that movement, and he was quoted saying, because after his predictions were way off, he was quoted saying, "Hey, but at least we scared people enough for them to take it seriously." Something along those lines. That he was even though they were way off, he was glad that they used those large estimates of deaths because it helped people take it seriously. And same thing is happening now. And I know Dr. Drew was a part of that task force too. I mean, he's been one of those guys who has been very anti-media. I mean, I don't always agree with Dr. Drew, but he was absolutely right in the beginning of this, that it's like the media should be the one to blame for all this because they're the ones who are just scaring the shit out of people. And then, like you said, all the political backlash of like, hey, if the NBA shuts down and we're the NFL and we don't, shut down, or we're a soccer or the MLS or whatever and we don't shut down, then we're going to look bad. So it just started this roller coaster of like, we don't want to get any political backlash, so let's just do what they're doing. So, and then if somebody does test positive, we don't look bad. And it, like you said, it was all for PR reasons.
I remember when the NFL free agency started, like March 14th or something like that. I remember all these sports writers going, they have to cancel this. We're in the middle of a pandemic. You can't do this. This is the worst look ever for the NFL. Roger Goodell's like, whatever. And they did it, and it got people off the, people started thinking about other things besides the virus, which was great, little sports. And then with the draft, they're like, there's no way they could do this draft. People are dying, and they're going to have an NFL draft, and people are going to watch for 3 days. Yeah. And that's what they did. They just went right ahead with it. I love that they made that decision.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And I think, probably somebody like Dana White or Vince McMahon are going to be some of the first people, or maybe even the NFL, that are going to really push to have people in the stadiums. I mean, I know the Portuguese soccer league started yesterday, and a lot of people there, a lot of the owners have been saying like, hey, how does this make logical sense? We let people get piled up in grocery stores and here and there, and they're like, and then in a controlled environment like a stadium, like, why can't we have groups of families together, kind of separate a little bit? Why can't we, so the whole thing is insanity. There's no logic. Like, people aren't thinking for themselves. It's like they've just said, hey, whatever they tell us, that's what we're gonna do. Oh, it's for the betterment of society. Just stay in lockdown, so and you might be able to save a life. It's like, I've been telling people for a while. I'm like, 20,000 people die a day of from hunger. We can feed them. Like, that's not something we have to test for. That's not something we have to, figure out how to treat it, or a vaccine or whatever. It's easily funded. It's easily treated. It's easily, removed from our culture, people dying of hunger. And yet we don't come together for that. if people, I mean, not driving. If everybody decides not to drive, yeah, the fatalities on the road are going to go down. But we understand to be free people, everything comes at a risk. When we fly, when we drive, when we do anything, when I drink, when I smoke, or whatever it may be, everything comes at a risk, and that's something that we've all accepted. And now all of a sudden we act like we give a fuck about our old people. And yeah, I love old people, but I know that you go to Eastern Europe, you know, or certain places in Europe, they don't even have nursing homes. You know why? Because they take care of their old people. In America, there's tons of nursing homes. Why? Because it's like, I'm too busy to take care of grandma, you know, and so let's just throw in a nursing home because I have to go to work. And all of a sudden, those are the same people that are super moral, and they're saying, oh, we got to stand for the old people. Well, where the fuck's your grandmother? You know, I'm like, did you take care of her? You know, now all of a sudden, so it was a perfect just cocktail, because you had nothing on TV. You had, you know, all you had was the news and these press conferences and the media talking about it. So counting on what you watch, if you watch MSNBC or CNN or Fox News, that was basically your perspective on what was going on, you know, and everybody was just kind of force fed like, this many cases, this many deaths, this many cases, this many deaths. And it's like people die of flu all the time. People die of cancer all the time. I had a cousin who died of heart failure just a couple weeks ago during all this. Couldn't even have a proper funeral and wake because of all this. And it was a reminder that, like, yeah, people are still fucking dying. And people die every day, regardless if you knew it or not. You know, while we're going on with our lives, people were dying. Hospitals were full of dead people. But now, if you televise it, if you, it's no different than like what Nancy Grace used to do, right? Like, there's kids going missing all the time. But if you could just pinpoint one story and one specific thing, and you could, the media could focus on it, it seemed like a bigger deal. And it's same thing with these deaths. People are dying all the time. But if you could focus on this one cause of death, and just focus on it all the time, it seems like the biggest issue ever.
Isn't it weird how they haven't reported how many flu deaths there were this year? You know, it's always like, you know, 20 to 30,000 or whatever they say, get your flu shots, but they haven't come out with it. Did some people have the flu? Did some people have coronavirus? How many people died of the flu over the last like 3 months? They haven't put that number out there. Yet no one's talking about flu anymore.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. And a lot of people, I mean, the false positives, these tests are giving tons of false positives, so we don't even know. And I've heard some doctors say that, you know, the tests don't really work, and that they're actually you know, testing positive for the wrong thing. And so it's like we don't know what to believe. But I think that's, in a way, works to the advantage of the media, works to the advantage of the elite, whoever, you know, is agenda, whoever is pushing this agenda. Because what happens is a lot of people, like, and I'm sure you've had conversations with people where a lot of times it's like you make valid points, but they're hearing so many conflicting points that they're just like, I don't know what to believe, so I'm just going to go along with it, you know? And
yeah.
And that's what people do.
Yeah, look, I was all in, whatever they said everyone stay in for 6 weeks. And about the 6th, 7th week, I'm like, all right, I've had enough of this. You know what I mean? Like, we got to start doing something. You know, I'm like, all right, if this is what it's going to be, we're just going to have to isolate. But, you know, now it's ridiculous.
Yeah, and it's hurting. I mean, how many comedy clubs are not going to reopen? How many bars, restaurants are not going to reopen? I mean, the long-term effects of this, of the reaction, is going to be way worse than the virus.
Yeah, and that's, who knows, you know, I don't know. I mean, a lot of people are collecting unemployment and got loans and stuff like that, which is good. So they're not completely broke. You know, they got loans for their business. So hopefully when they get back up, but like, New Jersey's going to open June 15th, just outdoor dining. It's like, you know, on a plane, everybody could sit next to each other. You know, they say, how are you going to distance on a plane? Even if you leave the open seat in the middle seat open, which they're not, you know, because there's only like 2 flights going out a day from Newark Airport to Florida instead of 12. So the planes are packed. Even if you leave that middle seat open, you're talking about 3 feet of some guys next to you, 3 feet over. So that's going to help. And the guy in front of me and the guy behind me. It's like they don't tell the airlines you can only have 7 people on a plane out of 100 seats. But going to a stadium outside, you're in a tube flying for 3 hours. But you go outside in a stadium. No, you can't have a live audience yet. It's ridiculous.
It is, and I'm hoping people are finally, but you know, it's like I always say, it's easier to trick somebody than convince them they've been tricked. And I think a lot of people have been tricked, and I'm hoping eventually people are going to look back and be like, holy shit, like this was a giant, just overblown thing, and let's just move on with our lives. And you're starting to see more and more people just be fed up with things, like even people like yourself and who are just, say, hey, you know what, if I have to do this for a couple of weeks, not to end the world, why not, whatever. But when you start seeing terms used like the new normal, like that stuff drives me fucking crazy, because the fact that like your kid or my kid might never be able, what are you saying, that he'll never be able to go to a ball game, he'll never be able to go to a WWE event? They're actually supposed to be in Springfield, I think it was in March, and I was going to bring the kids because they just started getting into it, and they're all like, when are we going to go to one again? I'm like, beats the fuck. I'm like, I don't know when you'll ever be able to go to one again. I mean, I'm hoping maybe next year, the following year, people can look back at this, but and then you get the push of like, well, it's going to come back. Well, it's like, well, so does the flu. That's why it's called flu season. Like, viruses come back. People get a little bit more sick, but we've never decided that anything is so important that we have to shut down the world for. And so I think, do you think eventually you'll be able to do comedy in front of a club, nationwide, go to different places, and things will feel somewhat normal again?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, look, like I said, Florida's going to be 50% starting tomorrow. So there's a room that holds 400 people. You're going to get 200 people in there, which isn't bad. And at some point, probably in 2 weeks, they'll be at 75%. And, every room's not sold out anyway. So if it holds 400, there's only going to be 300 people coming to the show anyway. So it'll be pretty, be kind of normal. Yeah, look, this thing is all going away. It's the summertime. It's hot out. Viruses never hang around in the summer. Will it come back late in the fall, early winter? Maybe, but at least we know what we did wrong. And then, we're just going to have to, take our chances, let the, young people go out and work, keep the old people isolated, and they're just going to have to stay in. That's just the way it's going to be. You can't shut down the whole country again.
Yeah. And
when at least 40% of the deaths are from the nursing homes. So if the number's accurate at 100,000, we're talking 40,000 from the nursing homes.
Yeah, which is wild. And the thing is, the truth is, like, the lockdown, like I said, like, the majority of people who are being the most affected by it are the working class people who are still, comedians, people who work at the service industry, people who have jobs. So it's like most of the people that will, that affect the most are people who are a little older, who might not go out to the mall, or might not, be, and look at all the kids, right? Because I know I have nieces and cousins that are in their teens and early 20s. None of them did any social distancing. I mean, they were all hanging out with their friends. They were all, doing their thing, and you didn't see this huge increase of deaths with young people. If anything, you saw barely any, and even the ones that you did see, there was very manipulative headlines, like one soccer coach, 21 years old, dies of the coronavirus. Then you go down to like the second or third paragraph, and it said that he had very aggressive leukemia. And I'm like, how is that not? Why isn't Facebook pulling that fucking story, saying that's deceiving? Why is there a double standard for all this? And
the 1-year-old baby that died of coronavirus, I think that was actually in Connecticut or something. Like, they threw that out there, and then it wasn't the case. But that was the headline that even, and then they came out with that disease that like Kowalski or something like that kids are getting, and they're saying it's because of the coronavirus, which it's not. It's been around forever, this disease that some kids get, but they're putting that on the coronavirus to try to scare people, like, oh my God, so now kids are getting it.
Yeah. It's that's why I think I had Sam Tripoli on like soon after the Joe Rogan deal, and I think that's a good step for like saying F you to censorship, because I think that having some competition, having a Spotify, and they're supposed to be getting into videos also, to have another alternative is good. But you need that because if YouTube, it's censoring doctors, which is ridiculous anyways, because like I say all the time, like, you go to doctors to get second opinions all the time. You go to different doctors. So that means they don't all agree. So if you choose to say that, hey, whatever doctor on YouTube isn't agreeing with Dr. Fauci, we're going to pull. It's like, that's ridiculous. It's like, a lot of doctors don't agree. That's why people go get second opinions or third opinions or whatnot. You see it all the time in sports, right? Somebody gets hurt, they're like, oh, we're going to go get a second opinion or whatever. Like, so, but all of a sudden it's being censored. So I think it's a step in the right direction. What do you think about the Spotify deal?
Yeah, look, it's great. It's great for podcasters in general. You know what I mean? That really, like, wow, that people are going to start taking this shit serious if they haven't yet already. And Joe's, the biggest podcast out there, so that's great. that he's doing it. Yeah, and then he's, it could be out of depth. But look, I have a feeling that Spotify, if he has some, is he going? They're going to let him have Alex Jones on. They're going to have a controversial doctor on. I don't know. I mean, we'll see. It's almost like when you get in a relationship in the beginning. The girl's great. She wants you. I'll hang out in strip clubs. Oh, I love strip clubs. I love drinking. Yeah, let's go to a dive bar and drink PBRs out of a can. Yeah, for 3 weeks.
That's so true too.
So that's what Rogue. They sold Rogan. Look, no, we're not going to censor you. You can have whoever you want, and then we'll see what happens.
Yeah. Let's hope he puts his foot down. I mean, the way I've always been in my relationships, where it's like, listen, this is the way things are going to be, and I'm not going to change. If you continue to stay with me, it means you accepted it. It's like that saying, when women marry men hoping they can change them, men marry women hoping they never change. Which is kind of true. I have friends of mine where it's like, what do you mean your wife doesn't let you go play hockey anymore or go play soccer? I'm like, you were doing that when you met her. It's like, you're not asking her to accept some new shit. It's not like you're all of a sudden like, hey, can we have threesomes? It's like, no, you're basically just saying, hey, this is the person you met, just accept it. You've decided to accept it by marrying me and living with me or whatever. And then women, it's the opposite. We just don't want them to change. You're like, hey, don't just look the same as much as possible, act the same, and we're good to go. So it is funny how different that is. I hope that's not the case with Spotify. I mean, Joe Rogan does have, he was one of my biggest influences when I started this podcast 6 years ago, because I loved the casual conversation, the fact that he was just always felt like he was himself. And I think like now podcasts, you do a lot of podcasts, you do your own podcasts, like, it's the one place that you still feel like you can get a casual conversation. Like somebody described it recently, like you're almost like you're listening into some two people's private conversation. And I think people really like the feel of that, like the fact that like, oh, I don't feel like there's some big company that's pushing some narrative or have some agenda. Like it's just people talking and sharing ideas. And now more than ever, we need that.
Absolutely. No, I think it's great for podcasts. No, Joe won't take any shit. Joe's like basically says, he says, I'm not doing Hollywood movies. I'm not kissing anybody's ass. I got my own podcast. I make my own money. I do my, theaters. I tour with my friends, and that's it. He's like, I don't listen to anybody. I don't answer to anybody. That's why he basically's like, I wouldn't want to do any movies. He probably gets offers. He's like, I don't want that shit. I just control everything I do. So I'm sure he's going to fight if they're going to try to censor him on that. But no, it's a great deal for him. I'm happy for him. He's a good dude too.
Yeah, he definitely is. I mean, the one and we talked about the vaccine thing. When I had Del Bigtree on this last time, at the very end of the show, I'm like, hey, Del, we got to get you on the Joe Rogan podcast, because he's had people from the other side of the argument on. And Del got a little worked up, and he said that him and Robert Kennedy Jr. have attempted to get on there multiple times, and he won't let somebody on from that side of the argument. And initially, I was kind of angry. I'm like, fuck, because he was a huge influence on why I started the show. I'm a fan of his. He always seems like he's open-minded to both sides of the argument, and he's had controversial people on there. We've had people on there that but obviously Alex Jones and whatnot. But it kind of pissed me off. But now after seeing this deal, it kind of makes me wonder if he was kind of just buying his time. That like, hey, let me just get, because he doesn't do live shows anymore. Everything's pre-recorded because of those issues he was having with YouTube and whatnot. So I'm hoping like eventually somebody besides Eddie Bravo will go on there and talk about vaccines in a logical way that doesn't sound, that somebody can take a little bit more seriously, because I think it is unfortunate that he has a huge platform, but he hasn't given the other side of the argument the same time and respect he's given the pro-vaxxers.
So wait, why was he not recording a show live on YouTube?
Well, what he has said is that basically because he was having, and I think this actually, they've highlighted this even more recently. I've heard people say that because he was having so many issues with like YouTube censoring stuff, things being demonetized because of this or because of that, or even just playing a clip like a song or something like that. And I remember I forget who he was talking to on the show, where he was talking about how frustrating it was. Like they couldn't, it was frustrating to do live shows, streaming live, because they're always so concerned about like, well, can we play this? Can we not play this? Can we show you this video? Can we not show you this video? And they were having so many issues that's why they started doing pre-recording. So I can see how that can be frustrating. And, you know, he's one of the few podcasts that actually is equally as successful on YouTube as he is on, you know, downloads, you know, where you would think a long form conversation that wouldn't be the case, because who wants to sit there and listen to watch a 3-hour conversation. But I know I did it sometimes. A really interesting conversation, I would have to play it in the background or whatnot. But yeah, so I think it was kind of like the first step that he showed some frustration with YouTube, and now, you know, going over there, I think, like you said, it's a win for everybody in the podcast community. I mean, think about like the PR power of podcasts when, I mean, Obama went on the Mark Maron podcast. I mean, that was fucking crazy. I mean, he did it because he was doing his whole PR thing of like, he just wanted to come off likable and his approval rating to go up. I don't think he really gave a shit about podcasts, but he respected the platform enough to go on a podcast. I mean, how crazy is that a president came on, went on a podcast?
No, and when in Mark Maron's garage, I've done his podcast, Mark Maron's, a couple times. I know the garage. You go in the back of his house, he's got a garage, and Obama came there. He was saying that, they had to close down the street for like a week and do like background checks on the neighbors and all that shit.
That's fucking wild. Well, the kind of shows you like the extent that they go to for the president's safety. Now think about oxychloroquine. Like the doctor, the White House doctor prescribed it to the president. I mean, think about like the liability. Like, do you really want to be the doctor who kills the president? Like, no, of course not. So the fact that he was willing to prescribe it, obviously he felt like there was some it was safe enough for him to take it for a certain moment in time. But yeah, I mean, it is one of those things where I think years ago when you talk about podcasts, people didn't take it as seriously. But I think the format of I think a lot of people are sick of like newspapers, if anybody listens to newspapers, but websites, TV, everything feels like they're selling you something. And podcasts is I think the appeal is you feel like you're getting real conversation with real people sharing ideas and challenging ideas and with less bullshit.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I've been doing my podcast since 2011.
Yeah.
I haven't missed a week, so I love doing it. I just want to be my own boss and talk and not worry about cursing or saying what I want. I just say whatever I feel like saying. I'm like, that's why I originally started doing it.
Boy, and I think it's refreshing. I mean, I think that's people like yourself. I think that's why people like you, is because the way you talk on your podcast, the way you do your stand-up, when they hear you being interviewed, it's always the same Jim. It's like it's never.
Right. Yeah. I'm always the same guy. I never put a phony. I can't. Maybe that's why I never got to the next level in this business. I'm not a kiss ass. I can't do that. I can't be a phony. I can't go out to Hollywood and just be a complete phony and just say whatever I'm programmed to say. Whatever you're programmed to say this. Like every celebrity takes the same exact angle, and all the comics, a lot of them that move out there do too. I'm like, I can't. I'd rather not make it to the next level. And dude, it wouldn't be true to myself. I'd feel like shit.
Yeah, and I think that's important, to be able to look in the mirror and be happy with what you're doing and who you are. And to me, and having kids, it's the same thing. Like you find happiness in so many little things, and just spending time together, and you realize like kids don't give a shit about how big of your house is or how many Twitter followers you have. They just want dad around, and they just want to hang out and and spend quality time together. And it really puts in perspective all those other things that I think when you're really young and motivated, it seems like those things are super important. And then as you get older, you're like, nah, that shit wasn't really important at all. And I spent a lot of my time pursuing things that never would have brought me happiness in the first place.
I always said, years ago, I said, is it really going to matter if I have a house that has 10 bedrooms and 5 baths or 3 bedrooms and 2 baths at the end of the day? Like, does it really matter? Like, what am I going to be doing in those extra bedrooms? They're just going to be sitting there. So who am I impressing that having 7 bedrooms that aren't being used? Just so I can have a bigger house to impress people I don't give a shit about. So I always said that. I'm like, I'm happy in just, 3 bedrooms. It doesn't matter. Well, so just sell your soul to get a bigger house or get bigger stuff or more expensive stuff or what?
And there's been studies that prove that like over like $60,000-$70,000, like your happiness doesn't increase at all. And I argue that it's not even the fact that your happiness goes up to $60,000 or $70,000. I think all it does is relieve stress. Like I think when you're below that, you're stressing about bills, you're stressing about food, whatever it may be. And then once you have enough money where you're not stressing about that stuff, it's not that the money brought you happiness. It just relieves some stress. So if you have more of it, it's, it doesn't really do much. So I think it's absolutely true. Like being able to just being content is one of those things in America where it's like looked down upon. Like you see musicians or like, for example, I always talk about like if my daughter, the typical father, if like my daughter was dating a dude who's an attorney, I'd be like, oh yeah, he's a good, that's a good pick. Yeah, you should date him. Or if the two choices was an attorney or a dude who plays acoustic guitar on weekends at a bar, I'd be like, oh fuck that duty. He's like pursuing some career in music. Fuck him. But that dude who's pursuing a career in music might be a much happier, peaceful person who's more content with his life and probably be better to my daughter than the attorney who's career motivated and could care less about like family or at least does care less about family and friends than he does making more money. And so I think it is like almost a cultural thing. But at the end of the day, like you were saying, like the reason why you're successful, Rogan's successful, the reason why people like you guys, I mean, musicians are the same thing. Like all those hair bands, like there's a lot of, the metalcore scene, some years ago when that was getting big, like the ones who did it right, the reason why Iron Maiden is still playing, the reason why certain bands, because they really cared about the art. And then everybody else who was just trying to make money to copy that, those are the ones who disappeared.
Yeah, no, they did. Look, I see a lot of guys that are musicians, they're in their 40s or 50s and they're playing like at the Holiday Inn or they're in a wedding band or they're just doing a thing on the weekends at a cover band. Like, hey man, I'm still making money at something I love. I'm a musician. I'm getting paid to be a musician. That was my dream when I was a kid. So whether in a cover band or whatever, like, hey man, I'm out playing. So I always respect that. I'm good, and not making a fortune playing in a cover band, but like I'm making money doing what I love.
Yeah, and that's so. I think you need that. You need music. You need art. You need comedy. Anything that kind of gets you out of your rhythm. Because I think from time to time, like you get stuck in this rhythm of going to work and hearing the same things, doing the same things. You become this machine, and you're just going with the motions. And you need something that the thing I always loved about music growing up was that and admittedly, I don't listen to as much music as I used to because I got so obsessed with podcasts, and it's been a great way of learning during between doing my full-time job and all that stuff. But music was always, I remember listening to 1 Minute Silence growing up, Rage Against the Machine, political bands that like I didn't really know that much about what they were talking about. But as years go by, I go back and I'm like, holy shit, they were talking about this or they're talking about that. But I felt like the music was sparking thought and making me look at things a little differently and giving me different perspectives. And I think traveling can do that too. I think when you're in the same place all the time, seeing the same four walls, going to the same office, going to the same gym, having the same conversations with the same people, your brain is at a standstill. And then when you travel, just seeing new things, new input, just like you're looking at something new, you're having a different conversation with somebody from a different place. It's all helping kind of mold your perspectives and opinions. That's why I've always been a big believer with my kids of like constantly getting them around people, bring them. I always bring them everywhere I go. Even though, sometimes it's easier to leave them at home, but I'm like, no, I'm bringing them because, I figure any new input they're getting, new lights, new colors, new questions they might have because of where we are, it's all going to help develop their brain. And with this whole lockdown thing, what have you been doing with your time to pass the time? Have you been going back, listening to some old albums or movies or anything else that's been kind of thought-provoking?
Yeah, well, I've just been, last night for the first time, me and my kid, I watched Back to the Future. I never saw that movie.
It's funny. I've never actually watched the whole thing either.
It took me bored in a pandemic to finally get around to a movie that came out in 1985. That's iconic.
Well, what's crazy? My wife and I have been going fucking crazy trying to find movies because the kids don't have to wake up early. So we're like, like, I don't know, I guess they're staying up with us every night, and we're going to try to find something to watch. And if it's not wrestling, where we're trying to find a movie, and a lot of the movies we've been watching have been like, I'm like, why can't we find a good new movie? Like, all the movies have been old movies. Like, we watched like Problem Child, we watched The Little Rascals, we watched last night we watched Home Alone. We're watching like all these old movies, and I'm just like, oh, The Sandlot, and it's just like, I'm like, we can't find anything new that's like as entertaining as those, where like the parents and the kids can kind of enjoy it. But it's also funny, like the things that were acceptable at that time too. Like some of the swears, like my son will look at me like, oh, they swear in this movie? I'm like, I thought it was PG-13, but PG-13 meant something different back then.
Yeah, I know. We've been watching a lot of the Naked Gun movies.
Oh, I had Jim Abrams on my show not too long ago.
Oh, really?
Yeah, he's awesome. His story is so important, and actually, I almost told the story when we were talking about coronavirus, but I've told the story so often on the show that because it relates to the whole coronavirus thing. I don't know if you're familiar with the Charlie Foundation.
No.
So it's his. I'm a huge Naked Gun was like some of my favorite movies growing up, and I'm also a big a fan of the ketogenic diet. I've been doing it for 5-6 years. I've had a lot of doctors and researchers on talking about it, and that's a whole conspiracy among itself, because there is a reason why you were told not to eat fats and to eat more sugar and carbs and all that stuff. It was the food industry and a bunch of really bad science and doctors who
the trans fats, have margarine instead of real butter and all that. Yeah,
but his story.
It's amazing that how they got that all wrong. I just put that out there for years.
Yeah, and it's even now, like I remember, sometimes I go to my parents' house and I try to change the way they eat, and they're like, wait, when you were a kid, you always made me get you the leanest cut of meat and all this stuff. I'm like, yeah, Mom, and I admit I was fucking wrong, and I was deceived and I was lied to, and now it's impossible to get. Like, I'll see my parents with like, I can't believe it's not butter bullshit, and I'm just like, that's so bad for you. And they're like, wait, I thought butter was bad for you. And it's like, it's so hard, because you were just told like the sky is blue, but your whole life you were told the sky is red, and you're just like, wait, what? You're giving me the red pill way too fast. You're telling me everything I thought I knew was a lie. I mean, look at the food pyramid, complete bullshit. When we're growing up.
I know. Yeah, 5 servings of bread a day. Okay, whatever.
Yeah, but Jim Abrams, his son, it kind of reminded me of your story about your son, where his son, when he was born, soon after was having these really violent seizures, and had these really violent seizures, couldn't figure out what was wrong with him. They had him on drugs after drugs, surgery, all this crazy stuff, years and years. And, he was, I'm trying to think how many kids he had. I think he had 3 total. But it put a lot of stress on the family, because this one child actually basically like demanded everybody's attention because of the fact that he was dealing with this medical issue. So it created stress and friction in the family because of this, because they, the other children felt like they're neglected. The parents feel helpless because they're going through these violent seizures and they can't do anything about it. So to make a long story short, what happened was that one day he ends up finding out that in the 70s, John Hopkins had some research showing that you could basically put your kid in ketosis by getting them on the ketogenic diet. So that means instead of burning sugar for energy, you burn fats for energy, and their brain will use ketones as an energy source instead of glucose. And basically, that's what's causing the seizures, is that like their brain can't process the glucose, so then they have like no energy for energy source for their brain. So they kind of they're I mean, I don't know how to scientifically explain it, but basically they have these violent seizures. So he finds out that John Hopkins has this research. He gets his kid on the ketogenic diet in 3 days, off every single piece of medication. No seizure ever again, until actually he got off the diet some years later. Seizures came back, got back on the diet, seizures went away, so it wasn't a coincidence. And so Jim Abrams went from a happy parent that they found a cure to an angry parent, because he's like, so you're talking about years and years of permanent damage by these violent seizures, permanent damage by all this, putting these chemicals, these prescription drugs in my child's body for years, possibly surgery that wasn't necessary. All this stuff could have been prevented if one person told me that this was even an alternative. And the craziest part is that this is Jim Abrams during the height of his career, so he has resources, tons of money, tons of friends in high places. He was saying how he was cutting in line for doctors that had huge waiting lists, and you had to wait months. He's like, I had friends that donated to the hospital that could get me to cut in line, all this stuff, and yet not one of these doctors once said, hey, you should try this. Like, it wasn't even something recommended. And so it's a perfect example of how we put these doctors on a pedestal, and we assume that if this doctor says this, he cannot be wrong. And yet this guy who had access to all the best doctors, not even he could get some information, because anything that is alternative is looked down upon because pharmaceutical companies control the industry.
Yeah, no, it's amazing. It really is that people don't, they all of a sudden they brought up the side effects to the hydroxychloroquine. They never bring up side effects to news about any of the drugs, because they have the commercials on CNN. So is CNN ever going to have Robert Kennedy on? You know what I mean? When they're against the pharmaceutical companies, when they're buying all the ads, there's no way.
Well, Robert Kennedy is actually friends with I forget what his name is, from Fox News, and they were actually close because I believe he was friends with his father. And he talked about how the guy from Fox News said, he's like, I can never have you on Fox News. He's like, even if I agree with you, he's like, if I ever had you on, I would get a call immediately and get in trouble. He's like, and Robert Kennedy was saying this. I think it was either the Valuetainment interview he did or the London Real conversation he did, and that's another two shows that were suppressed. Like, these guys aren't even conspiracy. This isn't Alex Jones you're suppressing. These are normal dudes who have professional athletes on, celebrities, businessmen, all this stuff, and not pushing any agenda, and yet you suppress their interviews because it's too dangerous to show that side of the argument, which I think hopefully in some cases make people more skeptical. Like, if this is so, like the forbidden fruit, you tell your kid not to do something, and the second you leave the room, he wants to do it because you told him not to do it. I'm hoping that maybe it makes people more curious about the topic because of the suppression of it.
Hopefully, who knows? Most people don't give a shit. Most people just read, Yahoo News, Yahoo.com in the morning, just their headlines, and that's it. And they move on from the day. They walk by CNN in an airport, see the headline on there, and and that's it. That's where they get their news from. They don't really dig deep.
Well, it's funny because, like, it's art. Art still seems like it's like music, and comedy seems like it's the few places where you can still be a little bit more open, and people don't. They don't get the same backlash as like a podcast or a YouTube channel or whatnot. I mean, growing up, like, I remember listening to Cannibal Corpse. I'm like, why? Like, I'm looking back, why wasn't that censored? I'm like, it's complete.
Right.
I'm like, literally, they're talking about eating people and getting into like specific details on what body part and how much blood and I remember I loved death metal growing up because of that. Because it was just like, it was so against the grain and so violent that it was the first Slipknot album. I remember when I was a kid. First Slipknot album, I'm like, what the fuck is this? I'm like, it's like you're taking, a psychopath, and you're taking all his emotions and thoughts, and you're creating music out of it. It almost seemed like you were like in the head of a psychopath, like just the sounds, the layers of all the percussions and samples and all this stuff, the darkness to it, and yet, like, we've decided that, like, that's okay. But God forbid you listen to a doctor who has a different fucking opinion.
Yeah, it's. I remember when that Slipknot, that first album came out, they went on Conan O'Brien. I think they did Wait and Bleed.
Yes, yeah.
And they were all in the jumpsuits and stuff. And my nephew was probably 10 years old or 12 years old at the time, and I was getting him into metal. And he was there with his dad. I'm like, you got to see this. And my nephew was fascinated, but my brother's like, listen, man, you gotta stop. He goes, what is that? He's like, you cannot get him into that stuff. I'm like, nah, it's harmless. He goes, no, it's not. He's like, my brother's just watching, like, what the fuck is this? My kid loves it. That's like my kid's favorite band. He's 10 years old. He's seen Slipknot 3 times already.
Real? Oh, that's awesome.
He loves them. Yeah.
Well, I always make the argument because my parents were coming from Portugal, didn't know what the fuck I was listening to, and I always told them, like, oh, it's just it's just music, whatever. And they didn't, they grew up on a farm, they didn't know anything about that stuff, and they didn't have media kind of scaring them, like, oh, your kid shouldn't listen to this. And because of it, I think they were a little bit more open minded to it. And yet, like, people like yourself and I who listen to violent music growing up, we listen to Slayer, we listened to whatever that was dark and violent, played violent video games. I mean, I grew up, Mortal Kombat is a legendary game because it was one of the most violent games at the time. It's like, wait, Kano can rip somebody's heart out? It's like, what the fuck? Like, there's nothing like it at that time. And yet, like, we turned out okay. So I think when people say video games will make you violent. Wasn't there a story too about Ozzy Osbourne, right? Somebody who committed suicide to one of his songs, and I think it was his attorney who said, well, if the kid's going to commit suicide because of a song, he was probably already suicidal anyways. And I'm like, ding, ding, like, absolutely. That makes perfect sense, logical sense.
Yeah, I mean, Judas Priest had to go on trial over it because two other kids, or two kids committed suicide, and they had to go on trial over it. I mean, obviously they won, but yeah, they were in the courtroom and everything, saying that there was their music. Yeah, and Ozzy, that happened to a couple times. Yeah, Suicide Solution,
That's right.
the song he has, and it's like anti-suicide. He actually wrote it again for Bon Scott. That he drank himself to death, basically.
Yeah, it's wild. What do you all these Soundgarden, Linkin Park, all these suicides? I mean, do you I know some people think it's prescription drugs. I mean, it is wild that so many in the 60s, 70s, so many people were doing like street drugs and surviving, and now like people are celebrities and everybody's dying from prescription drugs. I'm like, that kind of tells you something too, right? I mean, all these celebrities and stuff like that, like who are overdosing on prescription drugs, it almost seems more dangerous than the street stuff people were doing years ago.
They're easier to get. That's one of the reasons why.
It's true.
You know what I mean? If I wanted to do coke when I was a kid, I knew one guy that knew like another guy that might be able to get it for me. And even then, it was still tough but now it's right in your medicine cabinet. You go right to a doctor. I can go to 3 different doctors and say I threw my back out, get me some Percocets in town. I can go to 3 different ones, pay $75 to walk in, and I walk out with a prescription. Hey, can you give me 2? Can you give me 1 refill on that because I can't afford to come back, and now I got 2 refills. Go to another guy. So the system's fucked up.
It is.
Well, yeah, look, the Cornell thing, that pill he was taking is, it's major, suicide side effects to it. He took like 3 of them. Sometimes when you're delirious and maybe, he figured he needed a second one or a third one, or maybe his mind wasn't working. I don't know if I took one. Did I take one? Maybe I'll take another one. I forget. And they take it. That's, but they'll never say that about the pill. They'll never say that it could have been caused by that. You're not allowed to.
Well, that's the thing.
You can't throw that theory out there. When it says it right on the bottle and all the side effects, you're still not allowed to blame it on that.
Yeah, a lot of those mass shooters, they all were on prescription drugs. They're
all of them.
Yeah, they were all on, and that's the thing. The DSM. I mean, people have to look into this. The DSM is not scientific at all, even though it's in the title of it. The DSM, which is like the Bible for mental health, is complete bullshit. Like I have a cousin who has she's had some mental health issues, some anxiety and stuff like that, and they'll put her on like drug after drug, and they'll tell her, and I've told her, I'm like, let me guess, they told you there was a chemical imbalance, right? Yeah. Did they test for the chemical? No. So how do they know what's in balance? How do they know how imbalanced it is? And how do they know how much of something they need to give you that supposedly will put this thing in balance? I'm like, you have become a guinea pig. Take this drug. And the thing is, because you're a guinea pig, a lot of these drugs can't actually pinpoint like how to make you happy. So what they actually do is that they suppress all emotions. And what ends up happening is a lot of people turn into zombies. I mean, there's the Prozac stuff. I write music on the side. I grew up playing music or whatnot, and I remember in one of the songs I did years ago, I took like a little clip of somebody testifying in court about Prozac and being suicidal. And I'll never forget this. This lady was talking about how her family was sleeping, and she was over the bed with a gun. And at the last second, she dropped the gun. She almost killed her family. And the second she got off the pills, she was fine. And it's like, what? Like, this is a drug to fight depression and fight suicidal thoughts, but it's the side effect is it's causing depression and suicide. Like, how fucked up is that?
It's insane. It's you can't bring that up though because you're going against the. Can you go on CNN and say that? No, because CNN 70% of their ads are probably prescription drugs, so they got so much ad revenue coming in. So they're not, imagine that if you go on there and they go, why did you have that guy on there? Well, one of the biggest, they would know just right off the bat, you can't have the opposing view on there because it messes up their money.
Yeah. And that's, I guess that's always been my biggest argument is that, like, just let people look at all sides of the argument. I mean, that's why you look at how many people are sharing George Carlin clips, throughout the last couple of months. Like this dude was saying this stuff, a long time ago, and they make as much sense now as they do then. And that's kind of like the thing about comedy is like, even if you're a lefty, you might still go to Nick DiPaolo's show and enjoy yourself because he's making you laugh while he's giving you his opinion. And I think that's the beautiful thing about music is that music, comedy, art in general is that because you're getting it, it's not like I'm lecturing you. I'm just giving you this art that you enjoy, but in the process of it, I'm giving you some some information or a unique perspective. You're more likely to not fight back, and I think that's why like music and art. I mean, is there do you do a pretty good job? Because I know as we get older, it does get harder to keep up with like new music. Have you done a pretty good job of keeping up with like newer bands and whatnot, new genres and all that stuff? Is there any political bands that you're a fan of, or bands that talk about things that are a little bit more serious?
No, I don't. I've pretty much been out of it. Like I don't really search it out too much. So there's a couple bands. There's a band called Dirty Honey out of L.A. They sound like cross between like Aerosmith and Guns N' Roses. They're like 21-year-old kids. I saw them on a couple of festivals last year. They were great. But I don't really seek it out. I'm not really, I listen to old stuff and just whatever. I'm busy doing, If that metal show was still on the air, I'd definitely be seeking out, more newer bands, checking it out and stuff like that. But I figure I got enough to listen to begin with.
Yeah. Well, it does get harder because a lot of where you learn about new bands, like you said, is shows. You go to a show to watch one band, and then you're like, oh, I like this opener. I like this, this band. And I was the same way. And as you go to less and less shows, because as you get older, you don't realize the endurance it takes to go to a show. I mean, you come back, after a show and you're like hurting, you're like in pain. You're like, I didn't do shit. I don't even mosh anymore. I just hang out, and I'm tired from just standing up in the same place for so long. It does beat you up. I actually brought my son, he's 5, like I said, to his first metal show this past year. We went to a Maiden, and because that was like the first band that I got him into when he was real little, and we went there with our Iron Maiden shirts and stuff like that. It was so much fun. It was I hope that like people can have that again and whatnot. But is your son into newer stuff, or does he like a lot of the same stuff you listen to?
He likes the same stuff I listen to, pretty much. I just, from an early age, right when he was in the back seat in his car seat, I just controlled the music and I just drilled it in his head. So he had no choice. You know what I mean? Because that's the only music he was hearing. And I started him off with like simple stuff, like a good beat, like an AC/DC kind of thing, catchy songs, TNT, Dirty Deeds Done Dirt Cheap, stuff like that. So he could get, nice rhythm to it. He could pick it up. And then he got more into like the Black Sabbaths and the Slipknots and all that stuff. He likes all of that, but, he loves it. He loves going to shows and the energy to concerts and everything. So,
yeah, I think comedy and shows, that's a similarity that people who don't go to the shows, like they don't realize like there is a feeling in a room that with everybody enjoying it, in comedy, everybody laughing and like this vibe in the room, and same thing with music, like the energy in the room, like there's something that you can't really understand unless you go there, unless you're experiencing it. And that's the one thing I missed the most about going to shows, was that like you listen to a heavy band on a CD, if people listening even know what a CD is, but if you listen to it, with a good stereo system, it can still sound heavy and good, but there's nothing like live, drums and the bass just moving your body and all that stuff. I mean, there's nothing like that live, especially with heavy music. I feel like with other music, I mean, if you want to go see an R&B singer, like, okay, they're a great singer, but they're just playing the same fucking track that you're listening to in your car. It's like the same, you see more and more people use like live bands or whatnot, but with metal, it's like there's an energy that like it's almost undescribable. To live, you have to be there, and to see, like, especially, I remember going to like my first Azalea Dying concert like years ago, and just I remember this is when they were really like getting this huge cult following, and like everybody is just bouncing at the same time, and the music's going, and then the breakdown comes, and I'm like, dude, like if this was a cult, I would join it. You feel like I can understand like the cult, like kind of tribal type of thinking. When everybody is together, you get caught up in the momentum of it. So it's it is a beautiful thing, and it's awesome that like your kids in the same type of music. That way you can experience those and have that bonding together.
Oh yeah, we love it, man. He looks forward to going to the shows, tailgating. He loves hanging out before the show and stuff like that. And it's great. Because when I was a kid, my older brothers took me to see AC/DC, and then I got to take my kid to see AC/DC, and he knew like half the songs, that they played. So it was an amazing experience. I'm like, wow, I could bring my kid to this, and he's going crazy like I did when I was a kid.
Well, I think it's a great tactic to kind of have them kind of take baby steps first. Listen to music that's easier to consume. You kind of know what's going on. It's not as fast paced or whatnot, where it's harder for somebody to pick up on it. I did the same thing with my son. It was always like some new metal stuff or some some stuff that's like more radio friendly, that's easier to consume, catchy, and then little by little he would kind of understand it, get it, and then I could move on to kind of more complicated music.
Papa Roach, one of the bands my kid got into in the beginning with the catchy songs that they have, new metal and stuff. He really liked them a lot. That's one that really got him into more of the music and stuff. But he loved that, that beat and that new metal sound and stuff. So that was a big band.
Well, new metal gets a lot of shit, but let's be honest. Like, people, at least for myself, like people were living through that time, like Static X, Stained. Mike Mushak is actually from the town that I'm recording from right now, Ludlow, Massachusetts.
I know Mike's a great dude.
Yeah, great dude. Yeah. And my co-host went to school with him, though. Who used to be my co-host when I first started the show, Dave. They went to the high school together at Ludlow, and really good dude. I remember when I was a kid, I still have their Tormented album, like their very first self-recorded, published album with the blood and the cross and the knife through the Bible and all that stuff, which. Crazy story, which I'm sure you know, about how they're supposed to play for they got a show for Fred Durst and Limp Bizkit. Do you know this story?
No.
Yeah. So what happened was that they their manager got them a gig opening up for Limp Bizkit. Oh, did I lose you? No, I'm still here.
No.
And the thing about Limp Bizkit is that he's super Christian. And because he's super Christian, he's like, oh, who's opening up for us? And he sees this cover, and he's like, no, these guys aren't opening up for us. He's like, there's no way, because it literally was like a Bible with a knife through it, and like just really kind of, it seems like an anti-religious cover. And they're like, well, they're already set up and they're about to go on. And he's like, no, I don't want them opening up for me. And then he's like, well, it's too late. They're going to play. And then so they end up playing, and he ends up falling in love with the band. And of course, he ends up taking them under his wing and getting them signed at, I believe, Interscope or whatnot. And so it was funny how if he noticed that cover just a tad sooner, their career might have changed forever, because they might have pulled them from the show and boycotted them playing. So that was a pretty funny story.
Yeah, I knew that he discovered him. I didn't know that whole the backstory. I don't know that first recording.
Yeah,
with the Bible and the blood.
Yeah. It's so Mud Shovel was initially on that album. It was on this album called Tormented. If I could probably find it. It's and now I think it's probably worth some serious money. But I got it actually from the band before they got recorded, and I was big into like new metal. I grew up listening to metal and whatnot. So when there's this local band, I'm like, oh, these guys are pretty cool, And I always loved Mike's style. The whole band was good. I mean, Aaron, I know he, people have a love-hate relationship with him. I mean, I think if he stopped, what's up with people getting country and all that? I mean, I don't know, man. I mean. I this idea of like when you get older, your style is gonna soften up. I'm not that old, but I'm like, I still like metal, and I go to metal shows and I still see old people who like metal. So I'm like, why?
Yeah.
I don't understand this whole idea of like, oh, you get older and like all of a sudden you soften up. I don't know. I mean, you still like metal. You're older than I am, and it's like, has your taste softened up a little bit?
Not at all.
Really?
It's heavier.
Really?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, just as heavy. Yeah, it definitely does. Yeah, I think those guys think maybe there's a second career in country music. They don't know how long their band. Same with the guy from Hootie and the Blowfish did the same thing. But I think Bret Michaels tried to do it maybe for a little bit or whatever. But they figure, hey, maybe I might have a second career in this genre of music too.
Yeah,
in case the new metal dries up.
Yeah, which it did. I mean, I think even with metalcore, you saw a lot of bands in the metalcore scene bring me their horizon. A lot of bands just asking Alexandra, who was like super heavy when they first came out, and then all of a sudden they're doing like pop music, and you're just like, what the fuck is this? And it's so it is you want to believe what they say, right? That it's not because they're selling out or because they're trying to be more marketable, but it's because they're just trying new things, right? That's always the argument. I've had Bert and Seabell from Fear Factory on my show. I mean, they kicked ass forever, and they I know they haven't put out anything. I don't believe they put anything out new of recent years, but I mean, from everything from like the early '90s to recently, I mean, they've always been heavy and they've always kicked ass, and they have a cult following because of it. I mean, I love Fear Factory. I mean, they're one of my favorite bands growing up.
I never got into Fear Factory, and I'm in LA one time, and I'm at the Tower Records, and they had a listening post there. So they had like all these CDs that new ones came out you could listen to on the headphones. And I saw Fear Factory. I go, I saw them in Ozfest. I'm like, all right. And I go, let me give them another shot. And it was the Archetype album.
That's
and I was
so
like,
good.
holy shit. And I just fell in love with Fear Factory. Went back, got all their old stuff. Demanufacturer, Masterpiece. But that Archetype record is my favorite Fear Factory record. And that got me into that band.
Well, you want to talk about old movies, so this brings up some of the music we're talking about and old movies. Another old movie that I watched with the kids was the first Mortal Kombat movie, because I used to love that movie growing up because I loved the game, and the soundtrack was fucking phenomenal. I mean, you had Fear Factory on there, you had Napalm Death, you had I think Gravity Kills, KMFDM. There was a song with a geezer Butler from Black Sabbath. He did a song with this Bert and Seabell with his side project called Geezer. It was like this amazing, and it was this
He's 8 or something like that,
or
or
something like that.
Yeah,
it was this amazing soundtrack, and we actually rewatched the first one not too long ago, and the kids loved it, and I'm like, oh my god, man, this fucking soundtrack is so good. It exposed me to a lot of. I mean, I didn't know who Napalm Death was before that movie, and then I'm like, wait, how old are these guys? How long they've been doing this? Like, really? It was awesome, and that's another like classic movie that I loved.
Yeah, that I remember the first Saw movie. Right when the movie ends, when that guy's screaming and they go to the credits, it's a Fear Factory song. I forget, it's off of Archetype. It's a slow song, but I always loved how that movie ended with a guy screaming, and then it cuts to like a Fear Factory song over the credits.
Do you know the story of that Archetype album? How he did everything on a drum machine? Did you hear about that?
I didn't want to hear about that. That's almost like, tell me Santa Claus wasn't real.
No, but
because those drums, I'm like, holy shit.
No, but listen, this is how crazy the drums are on that album. So, as I'm sure you've obviously picked up instruments and you've played, throughout your life. You know that there's like restrictions on playing. Like my talent will only let me do this fast or like move this way, because you get in a comfort zone and you do things that's comfortable. Well, the drummer, I forget his name now, but
Raymond Herrera.
Yes, yeah. So he said, like, hey, if I create these crazy drum beats on a drum machine, I don't even know if I can play them, but let me create them on a drum machine first, because I'll have no restrictions on talent or fatigue or endurance, and I can just create the craziest drum beats, and then I can figure out if I can play it later. That's what he did. So he literally wrote the songs, the drum beats on a drum machine, not even knowing if he was capable of even playing them, and then he learned how to play them afterwards. And I'm like, that's a great idea, because as you know, like when you play, like if you get tired or something gets too hard to play, you might not go down that path because it's too hard to play or it's out of your comfort zone. But if you did everything on a drum machine first, then you learn to play it, you would remove those restrictions. So that's one of the reasons I think that album, like drum wise, fucking phenomenal.
It's unbelievable. I've never heard drums like that in my life. I'm going to go listen to them when I can get off this right now, because I haven't heard it in a while. The next one after that, Transgressions, was a good record,
too. That was good, yeah. I
like that one, too. But, then Fear Factory, a few years, probably 8 years ago now, came out with a record. Raymond was out of the band. It was Dino and Burton. And they used a drum machine as the drums. They didn't have a drummer on the record. Yeah. And I didn't want... And I'm when I was listening, I'm like, man, this is great. Whoever this drummer is, I love this drum sound. And then I found it was a drum machine. I couldn't listen to the record.
Yeah, I you know, it's funny. I like that album too, but I also felt like I would have enjoyed it more if I knew there was an actual drummer, if it wasn't a drum machine. There's something about it's almost like I wanted to believe it's like fake breasts. Like, even though I know they're fake, I can enjoy it.
Yeah, absolutely. No, and because they were talking about an interview, oh, no, we use a drum machine. I'm like, oh man, don't tell me that.
I know, and they also had some restrictions on what albums they would play, because once Dino came back, like there was, I think that there's one or two good albums that he wouldn't play because he wasn't in the band.
He wasn't playing anything off of Archetype.
Oh, that's right. He was in Archetypes. Yeah,
those two. I know that. Yeah, because he was out of the band at that time.
Yeah, which I'm like, how do you not play? Because I remember, that's right, that was Archetypes. Because I remember thinking to myself, I'm like, how do you not play those songs? I'm like, you have to play. I mean, that's like one of their best albums. I mean, Demanufacture is obviously a epic album. I mean, there's so many great songs on there. And but there was another. They were one of those bands that are willing to go against the grain, where they were this great. Because I know, like, now you have like all. Kill Switch, All That Remains, a lot of people in the metalcore scene that like combined singing and screaming. But like, I'm like, bands were doing that way before. And when Burton C. Bell was doing it, there wasn't a lot of bands that had the type of catchiness, and like, that song Replica. I mean, how catchy is that song? And to have that type of catchiness and yet still be heavy. I mean, they really were one of those first bands that did that.
Yeah, they were. I know they were a big influence on Slipknot too.
Yeah. I mean, there's so many great bands that were huge influences on other bands that, like, I remember Poison the Well. Remember Poison the Well?
Yeah.
There's bands. I remember going to see a metalcore band, and they're like all younger than I was, and I'm like, hey, you guys kind of sound like Poison the Well, and the singer's like, dude, he looks at the rest of the band, and he's like, I told you guys. I'm like, you don't even know these guys don't even know who Poison the Well is, and I'm like, you cannot do metalcore and not know who Poison the Well was. I'm like, he's like, oh, they're younger, they don't understand how influential they were. I'm like, yeah, because they were like, at that time they were doing a sound that nobody else was doing, and but that's how important doing great art is, because even if you don't make the money, you don't get the fame, you have an impact on trends and culture that shitty band who made it, or that shitty comedian who made all that money, is gonna, once he's done, like his 50 seconds of fame is done, nobody's gonna give a shit. But even if you didn't sell a lot of albums at that time, I mean, sometimes I'm listening to albums that I'm like, I know this album didn't sell jack shit, but I love this fucking album. I'm like,
yeah.
I'm sure you have that, right? Like some bands that you absolutely love, albums you love that you think are like epic pieces of art, and yet, like, I know they just didn't make it. It's unfortunate that many people didn't get to listen to this.
Yeah, that's a shame.
Yeah. But hey, Jim, I don't want to hold you up too long, because I know you're in the East Coast like I am, so it's actually a nice day. I'm sure.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, I want to get out before it starts raining again.
Yeah. But thanks, Jim. I really appreciate your time. Hopefully, we'll be able, and the listeners will be able to see you at a club near them sometime in the near future, and hopefully we'll have you on again in the near future. We'll catch up again.
Yeah, we're doing that Crease for Kids tour. We're doing some Beverly Mass. So we got rescheduled for the fall sometime, like November, December, or something like that. So. Oh,
I'll keep a lookout for that. Absolutely.
Yeah, we were supposed to do it, I think, in March, so we pushed it back. So, I'll be back up that way.
Awesome. Yeah, and every once in a while, I'm in your neck of the woods, so I have some family in Long Island and Smithtown. Actually, one of my cousins, my only cousin who liked metal growing up, he lived in Long Island. He played in the band Exciter, the Judas Priest tribute band. And, yeah, and he was one of the. I mean, all my family listened to like fucking Portuguese music, which is basically the Portuguese version of polka. And I had one cousin who played guitar and played metal. I'm like, I want to be like him, But yeah, every once in a while I'm in those neck of the woods too, and your neck of the woods. So hopefully things will get back to normal, where we can travel and go to shows and kind of forget about this shit for a little bit. But so people who are listening who want to get your podcast and and keep up with hopefully your shows that hopefully will be coming up soon.
Yeah, every Monday and Thursday, Everybody Is Awful is the podcast. It's on Barstool Sports, wherever you get podcasts, but I do 2 a week. They're free, and me just ranting about different shit, whatever's going on. Yeah,
which is a good time killer now that there's not much to do.
Yeah, it's funny because a lot of people like fans like, dude, I'm way behind on your podcast. I'm stuck in the house with my family, and you're cursing, and you're raw, and you're raunchy, and it's like I used to listen to this in the car when I was commuting. He goes, now I got to sneak it. I go for a walk and listen to it because I can't have that on in the background. My wife and kids listen to that.
Yeah, I think a lot of us have been having that predicament where it's just like when you should be catching up to stuff, it's been harder to. Same thing with us. Like my wife and I are way behind in watching movies and series. We just finished, we're one episode away from finishing Ozark, but the kids don't have to wake up in the morning, so they stay up super late, and then by the time they're tired, we're kind of tired, and then so it's been really hard to get them to go to bed at a reasonable time so we can we can stay up, but. Hopefully some good will come out of this where people will kind of reevaluate their lives and realize that, spending some time with the family is probably a important thing, because I had friends of mine that are like, oh, the good thing is I get to spend more time with your family. I'm like, that's because you spend all your time at work. I'm like, for me, not a whole lot has changed because I've always spent always made it a really important thing in my life to spend as much time as possible with my family. So it's, even though I've spent more than usual, it's not a huge drastic change.
Yeah, when I got my kid, after weeks, I'm divorced, we get up at the same time. We go to bed at the same time. I go, we're like an old married couple. like we're watching TV. It's like 10 o'clock. He goes, Dad, you going to bed? I go, no, I'm going to watch some more TV. He's like, oh, come on. Just go to, because then you're going to want to sleep in, and then I'm going to be up early. I'm like, this is unbelievable. I feel like I'm married again.
But that's awesome. That bond that you guys are creating is
yeah.
I mean, it's cool because it's like your little best friend. It's like you get to mold your best friend. He likes all the same shit. You talk about all the same stuff. And I'm the same way with my son. We listen to the same music. We stay up watching pro wrestling, or we stay up watching whatever it is. He gets mad when his mother and his daughter or my daughter want to join in because he's like, oh, I just want to hang out with Dad. I just want to go with Dad because we get to listen to like one thing my son's been like obsessed with doing is listening to theme songs to WWE wrestlers.
Oh yeah.
So we'll go for a drive and he'll like keep playing HBK. I'm just a sexy boy. He'll play I am a real love mayor, and he'll just over and over again. And I'm just like But if my daughter and my wife's in the car, they're like, oh come on, I don't want to listen to this. But I'll just jam out with them and not care. So it's fun.
My son loves Randy Orton theme song.
Dude, that's actually a really good song.
It is.
It's
a good song, yeah.
By Rev Theory, I believe, right?
Yeah, Rev Theory, yeah.
You know what's another really good song? Alistair Black's song. Have you heard that?
I think so, because he's made me play all of them. I'm pretty sure.
Check out Alistair Black. I was looking for it. I'm like, who the fuck plays this? But it's like a combination of a couple artists. I think it's like is it Agent Orange or Code Orange? Code Orange. Yeah, Code Orange, and then some other artists. But there's a scene like where he comes out, or one of the pay-per-views where he comes out and the band's playing, and it's like. It was actually phenomenal. Like the band's going crazy. He has like a angry Rage Against the Machine type of voice so it has kind of like this hip hop, like hardcore sound, and it's a really badass song. And my son gets mad because I always like play that one first before Randy Orton's, and he loves Randy Orton. But yeah. But it's funny how like as a kid, like I'm like, oh. Like I can understand now looking back because being older, when you see these guys throw each other through tables and chairs and ladders, like when I was a kid watching that, I didn't respect how much your body would hurt the next day because when you're a kid, nothing hurts. But when you get older and like you have aches and pains and you're like, holy fuck, man, like those dudes are going to be hurting, And I think that's probably why a lot of them have tragic stories of substance abuse. And, you hear Razor Ramon, alcoholism, pills, Jake the Snake, all these guys. It's sad because they weren't making shit for money back then either.
Yeah, there's a great series on Vice, The Dark Side of the Ring, it's called. Have you seen that?
I
watch them every week. I record. I think I've watched them all. I think they're in repeats now, but every week is a different story. It's crazy.
Have you? So you watched the Bret or Owen Hart one, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, that was I actually went after that. We watched it. I actually went online to see on the network to see if the pay-per-view was there. And I'm like, oh, there's no way they have it, but they do. They actually do have it. I mean, obviously, I didn't watch it, so I'm assuming they cut out that part. But just I've been curious to watch it, knowing what happened and knowing what's going through like Jim Ross's head and Larry the King's head, and like to see that. And then like one thing I didn't hit me either is like the blood was actually still there while the other guys were still fighting, and it just it gives me goosebumps just thinking about it.
Yeah, it's awful.
It's and it's. It's weird because my wife's like, after watching that, she's like, I fucking hate Vince McMahon now. She's like, I never really had an opinion on him. She's like, now I fucking hate him. I'm like, I guess. I'm like, I don't know. I'm like, I want to believe there's two sides to every story because, I mean, you see the Undertaker series, right? And he seems like a legit dude who cares about the guy. And, but, you know, I don't know. You know, he's also a really good businessman. So, you know, I've never got to meet him. I don't know anybody who has. So I don't know if he's like legitimately a asshole or not. I mean, to be that successful as a businessman, you have to be a little bit of an asshole, I believe. Like, you probably have to be a little cutthroat. But but I also know his family are all not just business people. They're huge fans of wrestling. I mean, why else would you fucking let Stone Cold Steve Austin, you know, stun you so many times and you know, do all the humiliating things they did on TV? You have to really enjoy the entertainment and then your kids are involved. I mean, when his son jumped off the fucking steel cage, I mean, like, wait, your dad's the boss and you're doing this shit? You know, it was pretty wild.
Yeah, it's good stuff, man.
But thanks again, Jim. I know I'm holding you up again.
Yeah, no problem, man. Thanks. Yeah, absolutely. Always good to be on.
Yeah,
good
yeah.
chat.
But enjoy the rest of your day. We'll keep in touch and hopefully catch up again in the near future.
Definitely, man. Thanks.
Hey, thanks, Jim. Fun conversation.
Right,
Thank you. Take care.
All right.
Believe in the ripple effect.